believe it's recording now.
Okay, thank you. All right, it's a few minutes past noon, so I think we will get underway just to respect everyone's time. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Suzanne Mason. I am the Resource Manager and Event Coordinator with the Howard County Autism Society. HCAS is what we go by. We are one of the sponsors of this webinar, along with Pathfinders for Autism. And we are very happy to have you join us today for our talk. I would like to introduce our speaker, Dr. Aaron Dallman. He is an assistant professor in the Department of Occupational Therapy and Occupational Science at Towson University. He received his undergraduate degree in music therapy from Appalachian State and an MS in occupational therapy and a PhD in occupational science from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. He's worked as a music therapist and occupational therapist, working with individuals with autism across the lifespan, early child into late adulthood. His research is focused on understanding the deeply rich emotional and occupational lives of individuals with autism across the lifespan. Dr. Dallman has presented internationally, and his work has been featured in peer-reviewed journals such as the Journal of Occupational Science, Journal of Autism and Developmental Disorders, and the Journal of Pediatric Rehabilitation Medicine. And we're very pleased to have him with us today. He is going to talk about mental health in children and adolescents with autism spectrum disorder, and identifying risk factors and the mental health challenges for these individuals. I would ask just before he gets started, please to mute yourselves so that we can avoid interruptions to the presentation. So please take a moment to mute yourself. And also, we are recording the webinar, so if you would prefer not to appear in the recording, please turn off your cameras. With that, I'll turn it over to Dr. Dallman. Welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Suzanne, for the introduction, and thank you to the Howard County Autism Society for welcoming me and giving me a chance to talk and speak with all of you here. I'm so truly delighted to be here, delighted to see some of you, get a chance to see your names over this virtual platform, and really just to get a chance to share some of what I've been thinking about in this area with you. As Suzanne said, I'm an occupational therapist by training, by practice. My research focuses on occupational therapy, but I'm also a music therapist. And so I come at my clinical work from dual backgrounds, training in music therapy, and this idea that music works in a lot of different ways, but also from an occupational therapy standpoint, this idea that occupational therapists have a role in really enabling folks to do the things that they want to do. I have a wide variety of research out there, but most of my research and scholarship at this point focuses on autism. I focus my research on understanding the wonderful, beautiful lives of autistic individuals, understanding their unique strengths, their unique needs, in order to figure out what in the world we can be doing, should be doing to create better spaces, a better world for them. So that's me. That's what I'm going to be. That's where I come at this from. And this talk really centers around occupational therapy, being and ways that we can all support young adults, adolescents, children on the autism spectrum to be able to participate and be successful. I'm going to talk about mental health in several different ways, thinking about it in a couple different domains. So we'll see the narrative sort of emerge together, but I'm excited to share this with all of you. As I begin, I want to say that I've designed this talk to hopefully be around an hour, but I encourage and invite questions in the chat as I go. I'm going to try and monitor that as I go and try and respond if it makes sense at the time. But I'm also going to take notes and hopefully get to your questions at the end. And we're going to reserve some time at the very end of this talk. So please feel free to chat. Don't feel the need to hold your questions. And I'm going to try and respond and move forward as we move through this talk today. With that said, let's go ahead and get rolling with our talk, Occupational Therapy for Children and Adolescents with Autism. It is about more than handwriting, and that's really the message of today. It's about more than handwriting. I'd also like to begin by thanking Emily Brovman. She's a student of mine, a doctoral student at Towson University, who helped me put this together, has been a great resource and springboard for thinking as part of this talk. So I would certainly like to thank Emily for that. As we begin, I want to honor the space that we're in and encourage you to be as you are in this moment. That means that I want you to be whatever is going to help you to feel comfortable, to feel like you can participate and process this information. That might mean that for some, you want to walk around the room, to flap, to rock, to jump, to hop, to skip. Whatever that is for you, that's going to help you to be engaged in this moment. I want you to feel comfortable doing that. I want you to feel comfortable being who you are. Moreover, I want to say that I want you to feel comfortable expressing yourself, however that is. Some people feel more comfortable expressing themselves in chat. Please feel free to use the chat feature here. Some people feel more comfortable waiting and thinking and reflecting. At the end of this talk, I'm going to give you my email. I invite you to please email me after. If you have any thoughts, reflections, questions, ideas, any of that, please feel free to share it in that way. And lastly, I want to affirm that we all communicate differently. Now, some of us communicate in this very professional language, the language that you'll hear me use throughout this talk, but others communicate differently. And I want to affirm that all of that is okay here. You are free to express yourself, to communicate whatever that is, however that is for you. This environment, this moment is inclusive. And the last thing I'll take a nod here, which is to say that we all come at this moment in this space at a different emotional experience. Some of us might be feeling anxious about a variety of things going on, nervous, excited, sad, whatever those emotions are. I want you to know that those emotions are okay in this space. It's okay if you find yourself getting distracted thinking about dinner or all the things you have to do or everything else going on. You have my permission, not that you need it, but you have this space here to be exactly as you are, who you are, how you are in this moment. And last, and I should take a note about language. As I said, I'm an occupational therapist, I'm a researcher, and a friend of a lot of autistic individuals. And because of that, they've told me that they prefer identity-first language. That means throughout this talk, I'm going to use phrases like people who are autistic, autistic children, autistic adolescents, as opposed to a person-first language, a person with autism. Because the autistics that I know have affirmed that's how they prefer to be referenced and talked about. With that said, if that bothers you, and we all use language differently, so it might bother some of us in this room, please feel comfortable replacing anytime I say autistic with individual with autism, and be forgiving of me for doing that, because I'm doing it out of the mentorship of the autistics I know, but I also want to be respectful of you and your own identities and experiences. At the end of this talk, what do I want to accomplish? Well, my primary goal is I want you to know, whatever you are, whatever your role is in the world of the autism of individuals with autism, how occupational therapists can help autistic individuals. Right, the name of this talk is Occupational Therapy. It's about more than handwriting, and in fact, it is about more than handwriting. And I want you to have a sense of that here. Throughout the talk, I'm going to emphasize mental health. So you're gonna hear this narrative about mental health thrown through here, and the different ways that mental health comes and emerges and for autistic individuals, and how we can help with that, how occupational therapists can be supportive of that. So, what is occupational therapy? The very basic of what we're talking about today. Occupational therapists are interested in helping people in their everyday occupations. I mean their everyday activities, the things that you do that are meaningful to you. You'll see in the right of this slide a icon with a hand holding a heart and some ideas about ways and places and things that activities that occupational therapists can help with. Things like bathing, dressing, eating, caring for yourself, caring for others, driving, being able to drive and navigate the community, being able to manage your home, being able to clean and cook, and all of those things that come in managing your home, managing your bedroom, managing your daily spaces and spaces that you are in regularly. Occupational therapists can help with play, helping you to identify, helping kids and adults be able to play and do the things that are fun, that are meaningful to them, and leisure, doing things that are relaxing. And you'll see some other areas listed here, some of which we're going to talk about today. What I want to emphasize in this moment is that occupational therapy is a type of therapy that helps people across their lifespan. We help people do the things they want and need to do through therapeutic use of activities, therapeutic use of the things that are meaningful, like those listed above. Sometimes people, or what is traditionally done, is the thought that occupational therapists work with autistic children when they're young, right? You go to the occupational therapist when you're 2 or 3, and we help you figure out how to write, and then once you're able to write and get yourself dressed, then we're done. That's all you need OT for. You're out. But that's not quite the case. We do work with people across the lifespan. I work with specifically with autistics in their adolescence and young adulthood, helping them navigate some of these changing situations and changing things that emerge. Because the reality is that our days change. Think about when we talk about dressing. Dressing changes as you get older, right? When I was younger, I didn't wear a bow tie every day, but it turns out now I do. When you get older, you start to learn to drive, or your work changes, your play changes. All of these things change. And because they're changing, that might mean that you also need more help as you learn these new skills, as you learn to navigate these new spaces, these complex activities, whatever that is. But really, if you come away with nothing from this moment, remember that we are here to help everyone be able to live their life to the fullest, promoting a meaningful, a better life. That's why we're here. Now, a common question that we should get out of the way early on as we move forward to thinking about what occupational therapy is and how we can help mental health about autistic adolescents is also the question of what is the difference between occupational therapy and physical therapy. There's a lot of conversation that we could have here, but for the purposes of this moment, I want to express that occupational therapists are interested in treating the whole person. We're interested in treating, taking a holistic approach and promoting wellness, helping people to do exactly those meaningful things. We don't work on isolated skills, but instead we work on those activities. So when you come to see me as an occupational therapist, let's start off with handwriting. I'm not working on just handwriting because that's boring. And what's the point of handwriting, right? What's the point of writing letters? There really isn't one if you're not writing a story or writing a narrative or writing a check or whatever that is that you need to write for. You see, we don't start at that base level. We're not interested in that small skill. We really want to help you be able to do the activity, help you be able to do whatever that is meaningful to you. As we think about mental health, we're thinking about, we want to help you be able to participate in whatever it is that meaningful activity that your mental health is preventing you from. That emotional regulation or depression or anxiety, whatever that is that's preventing you from being able to do that thing. I'm not going to just work on emotional regulation. I'm going to work on emotional regulation so that you can do that activity, so you can participate in the school classroom, so that you can be able to participate in work or go into work or not be anxious about getting on the bus, those sorts of things. That's the kind of scope that we're going to think about it here. And then when you think about physical therapists, I love physical therapists. I work with them all the time, fantastic people, and their strength is in treating a specific impairment. So I collaborate with my physical therapist who can help me work with individuals to be able to have the muscle strength to be able to get on the bus. Some of the autistic individuals I've worked with have really weak motor systems. They don't quite have the leg strength to be able to navigate the stairs well. They don't quite have the coordination to be able to reach out while also navigating those stairs to get on the bus so that they can go to school. So the physical therapist is gonna work on that base skill, right? They're gonna work on that muscle strength so that we can then together merge that into an activity, merge that into something meaningful. Physical therapists are, as I said, fantastic collaborators with occupational therapists. And so I love working with them. And you can see here now that we have a great role in working together. But as the occupational therapist, my primary goal is taking this from a broad perspective, right? Making sure that you can do the things that are meaningful to you, that you can do the things that are important to you, whatever those things might be. So, as I said, a common question here. The namesake for this talk is, what does an OT do? What does an occupational therapist do? And that was what OT stands for, besides help with handwriting. And that is our primary goal and our primary space of discussion. What we're going to be really thinking about here is getting back to or doing those chosen activities, doing those things that are important to you. Whether that be things like working on hand function for writing, or whether that be something like working on your emotional regulation so that you're able to actually complete your activities. It might be things like working on your sleep, as we're going to talk about in a little bit today, but there's a wide variety of things that we can address. And I want to start us off at something that is the basic of occupational therapy practice, and it's actually the basics of promoting mental health and among autistics, and that's what we are going to call today our activities of daily living. One of our most important activities that you and I do on a hopefully regular or daily basis is sleep. That wonderful moment that you can lay down, rest your head, and relax and recharge. Now think about that moment that you didn't get to sleep. You had a bad night, whatever that is. Maybe it was the night that you were anxious about a presentation coming up, as you know, I might have had 2 nights ago. Or maybe you were feeling nervous about something, an assignment that was coming up, nervous about a job assignment coming up, or a trip that's on your journey that's coming up for you. But those are moments when you didn't sleep well, that you might have reacted differently, that you might not have been able to be the best version of you, as I often strive to be. And the reality is, we know that autistic children and adults have trouble with sleep. We know that autistic adults and children have difficulty in staying asleep. They have difficulty in actually relaxing down and getting to sleep. And some estimates in 2019, one study suggested it's as high as 80% of autistic adults have trouble with sleep. The problem with that is that trouble with sleep also means trouble with our emotional regulation. If I have problems with sleep, that means I'm much more likely to be depressed. It means I'm much more likely to be anxious. The interesting thing about the current consensus in science is we don't actually know why we sleep. There's no consensus among scientists that there's about why in the world we sleep. All we know is it seems to be important. It seems to be important for longevity, but it also is clearly important for mental health. And the fact that 80% of autistics are struggling with sleep is a real problem when we consider that mental health is clearly such an important domain for autistics, but it's certainly an important domain for all of us. So what are the things that we can do here to help in this? The things that we're going to help do that can promote mental health, promote positive sleeping from our lens is the benefits of establishing a routine, right? We all have routines that are part of our days as we think about going to sleep. Part of my routine is I always have a glass of cold water beside my bed. I turn on the fan. I have a nice blanket, but it's actually a little bit more precise than that. My routine is I have on my sheet all cotton, 100% cotton percale sheets. I have a nice faux down comforter, not down. I'm vegan. That's a insight into me. But that's actually really important to me. That faux down comforter, that way that feels. And if I don't have that, I tend to not sleep well. I figured out this routine, and it's helping me to be able to sleep well. But that routine can sometimes be different or difficult to find for autistics. And there's a lot of reasons why. Right? Think about the sensory systems that many of your loved ones or friends or colleagues on the autism spectrum might tell you. The autistics I know talk to me about how difficult sometimes it is to get just the right temperature that doesn't also bother them, right? I know one gentleman that I work with, he got really hot very easily, but the blowing of the fan really bothered him. The feeling of the air pushing on his skin was really uncomfortable. And so then he was too hot, so he couldn't sleep. Then he turned on the fan and he couldn't sleep because of the fan, right? So that sensory experience can make this difficult. But as an occupational therapist, with my training, I know how to get around that. For this gentleman, we ended up figuring out a way to cool just his room he ended up we got a portable air conditioner. We put a blocker so the fan wasn't blowing on him, but it was blowing up to the roof, to the ceiling, I should say. Then that air is bouncing, hitting the wall, coming around, cooling him down without the direct feeling of the fan actually blowing on him. Right, but that's just one example. The problems with the routines of sleep can be and are greatly variable. But when these sleep problems persist, that has this impact on mental health. If you are around adolescents, you certainly know that to be true. General adolescents are very, very unpleasant to be around. It turns out that what tends to happen is school starts too early for them, which means that for their natural sleep cycles, it turns out adolescents really should go to bed quite late. It's natural for them to go to bed at 11:30 midnight, but then what's unnatural is waking up for school, right? And so then they get really grouchy. Well, for the autistics that I know, that problem tends to persist, right? It tends to continue on. And so we have to figure out a way around that. And that's where call me in, I'm happy to help. Other things I'm going to look at, other elements of that sensory environment, right? Lighting, temperature, what are the routines before going to bed? What are you watching? What are you doing? What are you reading? All of those fine, really minute elements that matter. It turns out they very, very much really do matter. Continuing forward, we also think about play and education and access to education. Something that is often surprising to people is that depression manifests quite young in autistic children. We don't exactly know what that looks like yet because we don't really have a great picture about exactly how to diagnose young children with depression. But depression is impacting many, and anxiety certainly is impacting the mental health of young children, and it's also impacting their performance in school. We know that what's happening is these children are tending to demonstrate aggressive behaviors because they're anxious, because they're not coping with what's going on, and it's scary. Right? It's actually quite scary when you don't know what's going to happen in your room. Think about that annoying buzzing of those lights above you with the loud talking of your teacher, of your peers around you. That can be overwhelming. And that experience can yield something much like anxiety, much like depression. And that's a lot to deal with. On top of the fact that you've got to learn. You're in school to learn. And so what a burden that is to bear. So as the occupational therapist, I'm there and interested in how can I make you more successful here. Maybe it's things like that sensory environment, right? Maybe I need to help you be able to cope with the sensory environment. Maybe I can change the sensory environment. That's my favorite thing to do, is to not force you to change, but let's force the environment to change with you. Because that's really what the world should be doing anyways, right? Shouldn't we always be creating inclusive spaces everywhere? But let's do that. Maybe I need to change your routine here in the classroom. When I'm feeling particularly anxious, one gentleman I worked with, he was a 6-year-old, and the days got really difficult for him as they went on. His anxiety increased, and the reason was it was this twofold issue, right? He started to get tired as the day went on, so that yields in this importance of sleep. But he also, the sensory environment just started to overwhelm him. You know, think about that kind of, if you're a boxer, right? You get hit once, you're okay, right? You bounce back, you're all right. The second hit, you're still okay though, but you bounce back. What happens when it's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7? Now you're falling down. That's what was happening. He was getting hit all the time in the classroom, not physically, but by an environment that was so uncomfortable for him, that was so difficult for him to organize, that we needed to find a way around that. And so we did. We did some modifications. I worked with him, and he was performing fantastic. He was doing so much more than he was. Bright kid, but just dealing with a little bit too much in this school. One other thing to note is frequently developmental regression can present when instead it's masking something like a mental health disorder like depression. A developmental regression, what I mean by that is a sort of loss of skills, right? Sometimes we think about it as a loss of language, a loss of social skills, a loss of affect, the way I express my affect, that it seems like I had something and then now I don't. But let's reflect on that for just a moment. And when I'm dealing with this complex world, right, I'm dealing with that multiple hits that I talked about of this sensory environment, of these challenges in school, that pushing and that all that things that come along with that challenging school environment, it's more difficult for me to concentrate on those things that I've already learned. It makes sense that as I'm focusing on everything else, I suddenly seem to not be focusing on other things. My partner might tell you that I do that in a way, and in the sense that if I'm really focused on something, I tend to not listen. And it looks as if I'm really not engaged in something. And it's not because I've really lost those skills, but because I'm so engaged in something, or so bothered by something, or so overwhelmed by something, it seems as if I'm not really who I am. So I say this to emphasize that sometimes we have to look behind what's going on to make sure that there's nothing else happening. We're not just stuck in thinking, oh, we've lost skills because that's the developmental thing, but instead remembering that it's actually a quite complex profile. And what I want to emphasize in this moment is also that mental health is very much relevant here as we think about this. Continuing forward, we can also think about leisure. And the impacts of leisure on our mental health and on the mental health of autistics. We know that challenging behaviors are reduced when when anyone has an appropriate leisure activity. Challenging behaviors are things like those hitting, that running, that elopement or running away. Those are what we like to consider challenging behaviors because they sometimes are difficult to manage for families, for peers, for teachers, therapists alike. And what is difficult about them is that they're often not great ways of coping. They're great ways of expression. I certainly get the message very quickly, but they're not great ways of coping because it can be dangerous to hit or elope, run away. So we want to work on those. And what we find, what the early research suggests, is that promotion of leisure activities, developing leisure activities, can promote mental health. Right? Having those things that are meaningful to you really do matter. One gentleman that I worked with, he didn't have any leisure activities. He stayed at home. He was very, very bored. He didn't go anywhere, and it had this negative effect, this negative cascade on his mental health. So what we did is we explored. We did a lot of playing around. I identified his skill sets. We talked about what he really enjoyed. I helped reflect some of where I was seeing his enjoyment, and we found something. We found a leisure activity for him, and that changed things. It changed things, in fact, quite dramatically for him, and suddenly his mental health improved. So occupational therapists have a role in helping folks identify what are those leisure activities, how they can find things that fit in with their enjoyment, their skill sets, and finding spaces that are inclusive for them, that are inclusive for where they can progress forward. And then I want to think about social participation here. It turns out, and this is true, that being around friends, having social connections seems to prevent, or at least in the moment, alleviate emotional comorbidities like depression. My research has shown that autistic adolescents have a strong passion or desire to be social with others, and when they were with others, that meant that they were able to, they had a better mood, less likely, had a lower chance of having depression. And the other really interesting thing about this is that changes, right? When autistic adolescents are younger, they want to be around more friends. I imagine that teenagers that I know, the TikTok phenomenon, they want to have all kinds of friends. They want to have a bunch, huge friend groups. And then as they get older, they want to have more intimate friends. And both of those things together, having good friends, having friends that care about you, having a large group and then a small group of friends is protective of your mental health. And that's something that occupational therapists can help with. We help autistic children develop social skills to learn how they can develop a particular way of inviting friends over, or how to know when a particular friend wants to get away from you or needs some space, or how you might respond or develop an activity where other friends want to be. We know that autistic individuals thrive under the right kinds of supportive social environments. And so sometimes we just need someone to help us form that bond. Remember the great thing about social skills. I think a lot about social skills. I think a lot about emotions. If you can't tell already, is that social skills are really about two people. It's not about me talking to myself, but it's really about meeting someone. And so occupational therapists will work with friends together. We'll work in schools and in classrooms to make sure that things like bullying aren't happening, to make things to see in the moment when someone's struggling with a particular social skill, to give them the skills to learn that sort of thing. We can help create that space where people can be successful. A question was asked, how do we include social skills in school occupational therapy? Because one of the things that we haven't talked about yet is that school-based occupational therapists, the way that we're sort of federally mandated, it says that I have to do goals that are school-based. They have to be academically based. And that's a real challenge. That's a real challenge as we think about making sure that I can get in all the things that I want to do. And what I have found to be my most successful strategy for this question, and I very much appreciate the question, is actually to focus on the proximal academic skills. So I focus on what is that academic skill that the student needs to work on, and then embed constant social skills work in that intervention. I've never encountered a single area of development that doesn't have some social elements to it. So I'm always including a social element to however I'm addressing a goal, whether that be that social goal. The other thing that I'll encourage everyone to think about is that once we get into middle school, we have to start thinking about transitioning. And now school-based occupational therapists are mandated to think about, well, what is this transition going to look like? Where is the student going to go? And social skills are part of that transition. If I'm going into a work setting, but I don't know, I'm not able to greet as I need to, or I'm not able to respond to conflict as I need to, whatever that social skill is that I might be challenged with, that's a great moment to work on them. That's a great moment to embed them in this idea of a transition. That's my goal. But really, I can embed it sort of in there. I can embed it in my intervention. All right, so I see a couple other chats, and I'm looking forward to talk. I'll bring that up when we get to the end of the lecture today. And actually, I'm going to have a sip of water. And I have this slide here as a reminder. As we think about play, that also has protective benefits for mental health. It goes along with leisure, but children need, and this includes autistic children, the chance to have opportunities to play. And sometimes we tend to get a little bogged down, I think. We tend to think that play needs to look a certain way. It needs to involve puppets or role play or whatever that might be, we tend to think about. But what I want to say is it seems to be important for mental health among autistics to be in spaces where they can be exactly as they are. I started off today's talk with that message, not in some symbol or because it actually is very, very important to create spaces where everyone feels included, where the way that I play is okay. So to this, I will encourage you just to remember this, to remember that it's important to create inclusive play spaces where children, it's okay if I line up toys, whatever that is that's comfortable for me. Let me do that. Let me be that person, because that's protective of my mental health. Now, I'm going to tell you, as an occupational therapist, when thinking about mental health, most commonly what I'm interested in doing is just educating teachers about how important it is that this individual has a chance to express themselves and to play however they want to do it. I want to go into classrooms and just let everyone know that it's okay, and it's actually important for this person to do exactly that. And that goes beyond the fact that play helps you develop gross motor skills, fine motor skills, language, social skills, problem-solving skills, cognitive, executive functions, right? So play gives us so many wonderful, wonderful things. And it's great to learn diverse ways of playing, but also being comfortable with how I play is protective of my mental health, protective of me and who I am. And then work. That infamous direction that we're all that many of us hope to arrive at, or encourage our clients, or encourage our autistic friends to eventually find some kind of employment or job. It seems to be the natural trajectory for many people. And what we know that autistic youth and young adults and adults are underemployed. We know that for a lot of different reasons, and it's not because they don't have the skills, but work settings are unfortunately not as inclusive as they need to be, or they don't necessarily have spaces where they're willing to hire autistic individuals. And here's why this matters a lot. We don't currently have any research that I've encountered that says that autistic individuals who work have better mental health. But we do have research in the non-autistic population that says that working is important for protecting mental health. So it's always my goal to make sure that the autistic adolescents that I work with, when they transition, they have something to do. They have a space where they're going to go. It might be work, it might be volunteering, it might be doing some creative outlet, but they have some direction that they're going to, and they're not just going to go and sit at home and play video games unless that has a clear direction for them. We know that when I'm not engaging in meaningful activities, that can be problematic, can increase my risk of anxiety. So that's something we need to think about. And so I say this to remind you, or to encourage you to remember that occupational therapists have the skills and expertise to address vocational skills, to teach those skills necessary, those social skills maybe for interacting in employment, or maybe the fine motor skills and being able to manipulate a particular cooking utensil in order to bake a cake, or maybe it's I've worked with an autistic gentleman who struggled with the steps to remember exactly what he needs to do at work, and that involved coming in, and first I clock in, and then I get my rag and I clean the tables, but I wait for this person to be done. Sort of that process. He struggled with that. So we came up with a strategy for him to be able to do that. I connected him with an employer who I knew who was just a wonderful, wonderful employer at a national chain. It was very encouraging of this gentleman working there, and he suddenly had a job, employment, and off he went. But those sorts of things also matter. So I encourage you, however your affiliation is with autistic individuals, feel comfortable going to your occupational therapist and really thinking about, how can I be successful moving on? How can I be successful progressing forward with finding employment? Many wonderful questions coming through to the chat. I'm excited to address them. All right, so let's talk about some of the types of interventions an occupational therapist create. So broadly thinking here, we can help individuals participate in school and social situations, help individuals recover from mental or physical injuries, help them prevent mental illness, things like depression, make sure that we optimize mental health is something that I think a lot about. And so that's something that we certainly are thinking about. And I want to take a step back here to remind you of the occupational therapy process here. So one of our best roles, I think, is in the screening process. An occupational therapist has this wonderful role in making sure and sort of screening, identifying if there might be any underlying issues. A screen is exactly is the first step in identifying and making sure that nothing might be going on. So when I start my treatments, when I was a school-based occupational therapist, my job was to frequently circle around into different classrooms and meet new kids. And as I met them, I was talking to teachers, talking to uh, other students, and getting a sense of who might need additional help. And this served as my screen. But then we move into a comprehensive evaluation. This is that wonderful report that you're getting from the occupational therapist, where they're really trying to understand your child. But the one thing that you never forget, whether you are a caregiver, a parent, a loved one, a sibling, a whatever your role is in knowing autistics, whenever that evaluation is happening, your knowledge is the most important thing, right? Your knowledge is key because you know this individual more than I'll never know them as the occupational therapist. You've grown up with them. This is your best friend, your cousin, someone you've gone to barbecues with, right? You know this individual. And so don't be afraid to make sure that your voice is heard so that your voice says exactly what this individual what you know about this individual. And don't be afraid to raise your voice if you start to see something changing. If you start to see something that just doesn't look quite right to you. I'm going to talk about in a moment some of the hallmarks of a mental health issue or challenges among autistic adolescents and young adults. And if you start to notice those things, don't be afraid to voice and say, I think something's going on here. This is important to me. It's important to this autistic individual. Raise your voice. And if there are people on this call who are autistic themselves, I encourage you to do the exact same thing. Raise your voice if something just doesn't quite feel right. And then lastly, we get to the very exciting process of treatment and then progressing towards an outcome, progressing towards making sure that things are moving in the right direction. And then lastly, the cycle continues because we all change and develop and progress. Now, I'm going to embedded in this talk is a couple of stories, and I want to move forward with one story. That's about Maggie. So Maggie is a young lady. She's 3 years old, but the IQ tests, the most developmental tests, are going to tell you that she's about 18 months old. She presents as many of the children that I work with do, as someone who avoids eye contact, who plays by herself, who tends to flap her hands and jump around. Well, when I noticed that Maggie was, when I first met her, the parent came to me and said, she's kind of changed a little bit. She was hitting herself, and that was different than before. It was different that she had started hitting herself. She seemed to no longer be interested in even being around her mother, hugging her mother. She used to hug her mother, but that didn't seem to be the case. And she was very much avoiding social contact, turning away from therapists, crawling under the table, just very much avoiding people and contact and others. And what I found when I was talking with her and learning a little bit more about Maggie was that she was really struggling with her emotional regulation. Her mood seemed to be quite depressed and down a lot. Which is sometimes surprising when we think about it, that a young lady as young as 3 can be dealing with something as complex and weighty as depression. And what I learned when interacting with Maggie and through my intervention with her was that she was quite bothered by the sensory experiences around her. It turns out that they had just become too overwhelming, and as Maggie had gotten older, her sensory system had gotten just less skilled at pulling out information and pulling out what's necessary. And so that meant she really struggled to cope with all of that. So my intervention focused on allowing her to have ways of coping. It focused on things like providing her the sensory environment so she could be comfortable, providing her moments of quiet and relaxation before she had challenging spaces to go to. It focused on providing her with comfort, sensory comforts, things like a weighted blanket, sure, but also things like a swatch of a material, like a feathery type of material that she liked. But those sorts of things helped regulate her, helped her reconnect and prevented these sort of emotional symptoms that might have gone on to be something like depression. It was undiagnosed, but that might have been the direction it was going. And just a reflection about how important the senses are for our everyday being and our everyday mental health, right? Think about all these elements here, right? Being bothered by food and smell, hating being tickled or cuddled, but yet everyone wants to touch you and cuddle you. Maybe it's that you struggle and fall a lot, and that can be challenging to deal with. But this is a lot for someone to deal with, and it makes complete sense, I think, as we reflect on it, why this can be difficult and why folks on the autism spectrum might also struggle with the emotional side of all of this that they're experiencing. And as we think about the senses, we know that, and this is the encouraging thing, there are interventions, we have skilled interventions that work. Interventions that can help your child be able to regulate their sensory environment, to be able to pick out what sensory information is important. There are things like interventions that are evidence-based in the research and can help your child improve their academic performance by helping them figure out what is the right sensory information. I'll remind you at the start of this talk, I talked about the bright lights in the room of the classroom and that buzzing of those terrible, terrible fluorescent lights and how distracting that can be. Right? But once we work on that and we use our interventions that help you be able to identify, you know what, I can tune that out by focusing in on this, that sort of sensory ground, kind of grounding experience, we might call it. Then I'm able to focus on my school, focus on my class, and then I'm able to show all the great things that I can do. I'm able to be successful. And that is oh so important. And as we think about the census, I talked about one intervention that is, we talked about this sort of sensory approach about helping you figure out ways that you can cope with the sensory environment. But I want to introduce you to another approach that you might encounter an occupational therapist use that is very much evidence-based and that can help individuals cope with uncomfortable environments, aspects, things like touching and textures and things like that. That can also help people cope with things that provoke anxiety, those anxiety-provoking triggers that are problematic for many autistic youth as we're thinking about their mental health. And this is an approach that we're going to call cognitive behavioral therapy. But this is a little bit different than traditional cognitive behavior therapy. So traditionally, we did this sort of thing that was very behavioral in nature. And it was about, if I'm going to treat you to this stimulus and then change your outcome. And now we know that was kind of problematic. There's a lot of reasons for that. But we've talked to autistics and figured out, these are the problems with that style of intervention. So now we've sort of reflected in that moment and decided, how are we going to move forward? How are we going to do evidence-based practice while also still supporting autistics in a way that they are comfortable with? So one of the things that I encountered a young gentleman who was just so afraid of and just so nervous by was lightning. This young gentleman, and he, as he aged into adolescence, became really problematic because he was no longer. He just couldn't cope. He was always saying to me, a storm is coming. Is a storm coming? Is a tornado coming? Is a storm coming? We were stuck on that moment. And that was something very much akin to anxiety. It was also something that helped foster some depression in him because he was not only worried about it, but that impacted his mood. And that was a thing. That was a problem for him. It was preventing him from participating in those meaningful activities. So this had a reaction of this negative mood that was really a problem. And our intervention, it didn't quite look like this, right? Sometimes we think that's what therapists look like, that we just sort of sit on couches and talk and have our little clipboards and then off we go. But that wasn't what we did together. Our first strategy was to address the immediate sensory environment. Lightning can be overwhelming. The sound, it really bothered this guy. So we said, all right, let's think of a strategy. And I worked with him. And together, we identified this, that we could use headphones and that would help. So we met, we worked together. We both wore headphones as we communicated with each other and figured out, okay, this is one element of it. What's the next element of it? So then we identified that the anticipation of it was really a problem. So we figured out a new way that he could mold that energy, that anticipatory energy, into something different, a new meaningful activity that he could embed within that, that would help him cope with this moment, that would help him cope with this challenge in the immediate, right? Anxiety has multiple steps. It's not just about that one little moment, but it's long and persistent and frankly quite annoying. So we had to figure out something to do at each step. But all along the way, he was a helpful thinker with me and helpful in figuring out what we could do in order for him to be successful. I've done things with other individuals. I worked with a young lady who was always so nervous about fire trucks. She was someone who we might consider as someone who is not very, does not have a lot of verbal language or methods of expressing herself beyond vocalizations and some words that she used, primarily about 5 to 10 words. And fire truck was one of them. And in fact, she was very anxious about it. And that led to, again, some elements of depression. So what did we do together? Well, first thing we did is we worked on some breathing activities, but it wasn't just about breathing. It was about breathing and embedding in it something that was meaningful for her. So part of what she worked on was breathing, but it was also, she had this intense desire to be helpful. So she worked in her classroom. She was someone who was going to be the fire marshal, and she helped whenever the fire alarm went off. She knew exactly what to do, and she was a leader in the classroom. And that was all without language. So there's a lot of different spaces and things that occupational therapists can do to help promote this kind of mental health. And that goes also into socio-emotional treatment programs, other sorts of things that are going to focus here. Focus our work in promoting access, promoting and alleviating the magnitude of these effects. But I want to talk next about a gentleman that I worked with whose name is James, or rather his pseudonym is James. So James, he's a 14-year-old adolescent. He spends most of his day playing video games. He goes to school. He's hanging out with his friends. What a lot of times when he hangs out with his friends, they're also playing video games. Things like PlayStation, playing online with people sort of online. And so often his friends aren't immediately in his physical presence, but those are his friends. Those are the people he connects with, the people that he talks with. His favorite games, he told me, are Mario Kart, Roblox, and in fact, he was the one who taught me about Roblox. I actually had no idea what it was. And James, like most individuals that are autistic, had an average IQ, and he was diagnosed under the previous diagnosis of high functioning autism spectrum disorder. Of course, that's all problematic labels aside, as well as ADHD. But I was really interested in what James was doing because when he was referred to me, primarily for his school. He was having trouble in school, having trouble completing his homework. He had some handwriting issues, and that's why he came to my desk, was because he had handwriting problems that was preventing his teacher from reading his writing. So I met with James and we had a conversation. We talked. I had him do some handwriting samples, took a look at what he was doing. But as we were sitting and talking, he told me that he was struggling with making friends. He had some interactions with his friends online, but he felt like they weren't good friends, and he felt like they didn't want to be around him. I asked him how he'd been feeling over the past 2 weeks, because I ask that of everyone I work with. And he told me, and it's different, right? Some people express themselves verbally, others don't. So I have different ways of asking that question. And he told me that he had been having trouble completing his schoolwork. He had been having trouble eating. And he said he felt like he was ugly. He felt he didn't like his body. And was talking with him, and we started talking about his yesterday morning. And I should preface this by saying this is going to be a difficult conversation about mental health and depression and in this moment. So please feel free to mute for this next 2 minutes if that is a challenging conversation for you. And James told me that the previous morning he had been contemplating suicide. He told me that he woke up that morning, he sat in bed for 2 hours, and he had thought about taking his own life. And luckily, and I am so deeply thankful that he did not do that day. He did not do that at all while I was there with him. But the reality is, and this is why this matters, people on the autism spectrum are much more likely to commit suicide than those who are not on the autism spectrum. They're much more likely to have depression. We'll talk about a little bit about that in a moment, but they are much more likely to have to commit or contemplate committing suicide. So that means that we have to figure out ways. We need to be careful and reflective about caring for our autistic individuals and checking in on them. And occupational therapists certainly have a role in that. We've talked a little bit about that today. But I also want you to know that you have a role in that too. You have a loved one, someone you know here who is on the autism spectrum. Maybe that is you yourself. And it's important that we continue to check in. So thinking about mental health, thinking about this very, very important topic, the early risk factors. What are the things that we're looking for? Things that we're looking for are emotional, behavioral, academic, interpersonal issues that are arising. Things like an aggressive behavior towards others, or if you're feeling aggression towards you. Maybe you're feeling bullying. Maybe you're feeling just attacked by a teacher or by your therapist even. That can lead to mental health issues. Whenever you have broadly, when we start to see changes in and hear difficulties, when you have weak friendships like James, when you have difficulties just making friends or being connected with friends, that can lead to mental health problems. I also look for things like depression, right? Are you reporting or seeming sad a lot? But what's worth noting is that depression is actually really different and difficult to diagnose in autism. And there's a lot of reasons for that, and we're not here to talk about that today, but I want you to know a little bit about some of the things that I look for when I think about depression among autistics. And that's, I look for changes in your and how you are, your presentation, right? So if you were that talkative earlier and suddenly you seem to be not talkative, or maybe you were someone who used to STEM, hand flap or whatever was your tool for expressing yourself, and now you're not. Maybe it's someone who was aggressive, but now maybe you're reacting more aggressively. Those are things that can be markers of depression. And notice that none of those things require verbal language. Sometimes we think that depression is limited only to those who can talk to us, because if you can't talk, you don't know you're sad, right? That's not true. We know that people who do not speak verbally do in fact have depression. We don't know exactly how much because we're not as great at figuring that out. We're not as great at seeing it and identifying it. But anytime you start to see those changes, as you start to see things shift, it just someone who seems a little bit different, that's a moment to take another step and say, maybe this is something more, and maybe it's not. We all have bad days, right? That happens. But when we have a lot of bad days or a series of bad days, that starts to be when I start to think a little bit more about it. I certainly look for those academic problems, bullying, when grades start to change, school dropping out or going away, and when you seem to be not as engaged in your school performance. Those can be moments where I might be interested in your mental health. So what are some practical tools that we can do, practical things that everyone can do? First of all, we know that, as we talked about here, meaningful activities really do matter. participating in the things that are helpful, connecting with others, those are things that really do matter. So reaching out, being inclusive, being supportive, that really, really does matter. Occupational therapists are part of that team, so never hesitate to reach out. Never hesitate to connect with your occupational therapist, whether you're in school or maybe elsewhere, but certainly never hesitate to connect. And early identification is always the best. The earlier we identify something, the better it is. So if you ever have any suspicions or concerns, bring it up. Depending on the individual, sometimes I would suggest if the individual is able or willing to talk to the autistic individual. Sometimes it's talking to their friends or parents. Sometimes it's talking to their teacher. But really reach out. It is never too early to reach out. That seize the moment is my belief on that. And I want to emphasize the severity of this issue now, because obviously I care a lot about this. So if I look at general adolescence, right, I just looking at the what I might call the non-autistic adolescents, it's about 7.5% of non-autistic adolescents will have depression. And in fact, what I want to say is the United States Preventive Services Task Force says that we actually have a role in everyone should be screened. Every adolescent should be screened for depression. And what I'm going to say is that's true for autistic adolescents. And what I'm going to say is I want to make you thoughtful about just keeping an eye out, no matter who you are, always keeping an eye out. Because when we look at in the autistic population, that is a lot different. So we saw here at 7.5%. Here, it's looking by about around 50%, 44%, depending on the study that you might look at, of autistics are going to go on to have something like depression. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are listed here. But the really important thing is to say that occupational therapy can help. We have a role in helping prevent the magnitude of depression, making sure that people have things that are meaningful to them and helping them be successful in those things. But also, I want to encourage you to maintain that suspicion as well. That is never creating supportive spaces, reaching out, talking to your friends, checking in on the people around you, autistic or not. These have been deeply challenging moments. COVID aside, for everyone, with all of the circumstances going on, these are really challenging moments. And my research and clinical work suggests that it is just as challenging, if not more, for our autistic adolescents. So please feel comfortable reaching out to your occupational therapist. You've seen some of the ways that occupational therapists can be part of your team, helping you, whether you're autistic or not, to be successful and to participate in those wonderful things that truly are meaningful to you. And I will end by saying very concretely, occupational therapy is in fact about more than handwriting. And it can be about so much more than that. So I want to take a moment to provide some space for reflection. And we've got about 25 minutes. So I actually want to honor this space and just take a minute or two. I'm going to read through the questions and comments in the chat. But reflect and gather your thoughts. I'm going to take a sip of water, and then I'll come back and respond, and also invite more questions through the chat. All right. I'm going to respond to a few chat questions that have come in throughout the talk, and certainly welcome anyone to unmute, come on video, or just unmute or share in the chat. Any other follow-up questions? There was a question about. There was the first question I think I'm going to address last. So your first question person, I will come back to you, I promise. But there's a really important question here, noting they asked me to share my research, which I certainly will be glad to do. I'll present my email in a moment. Reach out, email me. I'll be happy to share anything I can find with you. But they said, part of their personal experience says that social participation might increase anxiety. And I think that's a really important statement. This isn't true for everyone. Social participation might not be the right thing for everyone. For some people, social anxiety is going to make social participation uncomfortable. But what I tend to find is what really matters isn't so much the fact that you are doing social interaction, but it's about the quality of that social interaction. It's not about how many people you're around, but it's about who you're around and making sure those people are supportive people. And that's not always easy, right? Many people were raised in, I'm going to call them non-autistic environments that were taught how to socialize in a very specific way. And autistics socialize sometimes differently. And that's, frankly, I think amazing and wonderful, but some people struggle with that. And it's really quite important that autistics, like every one of us, are in spaces where we feel like we can be who we are, that we're comfortable being who we are. So many autistics tell me that they like hanging out with other autistics because they know that they're supported and inclusive, that people like that they can be who they are and express themselves. But also I find that when I encourage families to create spaces, social spaces where autistics can feel like they can be comfortable being the social people they are, they tend to enjoy that. Now, of course, and this is just to reiterate, individualized interventions matter, right? None of this is apply it to everyone. You've all heard the phrase. It's probably said quite a bit, but if you met an autistic individual, you've met one autistic individual. That's certainly true. It's true of all of us. We're all quite a bit different. But occupational therapists are built on this idea of individualized intervention, and that not everything is going to work for everybody. Some things are going to work for a lot of people of a particular group, but nothing is going to work for everybody. And so it's always my interest to make sure that we design it in such a way that someone's going to be successful. So I certainly would reflect hard if that was the case, if I was with someone and that those social experiences were causing a lot of anxiety, we might need to think of a different way to make sure that this person's mental health is successful, to support their mental health. Another question is about some direct clinical questions, which are fantastic. One question is about managing aggressive behaviors and autistic adults or adults with autism. I'm sorry, I want to use your language. And it sounds like this individual might also have an interest in some behaviors where they eat non-food items. It sounds like this person tried providing an oral stimulus in order to soothe the sensory-seeking behavior. I think that's a nice approach. This is an adult who, an autistic adult who maybe is aggressive and demonstrating some aggressive type behaviors, and so we're thinking about what are we going to do to be supportive. And my first question with that, with any kind of question with aggression, is behaviors are always communicative. So I need to know, what are you communicating with this aggression? What do you get? What are you telling me through whatever this aggression is? So that's the answer. The answer is like, we don't know the intervention until we know the cause. We know what you're telling me, and I guess that's the question. So if that person who asked me that question, feel free to chat below and tell me if you know what they might be communicating. But that's really my job as an occupational therapist, is to try and figure that out. I'm always looking for, what are you telling me? How is your method of expression? And I didn't begin my talk by saying this, but I worked quite a bit with autistic individuals who express themselves with aggressive means. These were folks who did a lot of hitting and biting and scratching and things like that, because was their effective method of communication. And it really varied. One gentleman that I worked with, he was very, very aggressive, but the answer was actually, for him, it was challenge. What I did was gave him some really, really hard work, and that was it. He was all in. He loved the challenge, and that's what he needed. He hadn't had any tasks that were challenging him. Everything gave him things that were really, really easy to do, but that wasn't who he was. He didn't want easy. He wanted something that was difficult. And so when I did that, the behaviors essentially all but disappeared. They all disappeared, except for the occasional difficult day where he was hungry. When he was hungry, he would also struggle with that. So, we worked on food and food routines, things like that. So a question, such a really fantastic question. How do we navigate sex education in school for autistic adolescents when we have hesitant parents? And that's a really lovely question. And the answer is, put the best I can. First of all, in the schools, we want to respect parent wishes. So that's something that I always will suggest. Talk with parents, try and make sure that they feel comfortable seeing the value of this type of sex education. But I just want to speak broadly here, since we're all coming at this from different moments. Some of us in the room, I think, are therapists or soon to be therapists. Some of us in the room are affiliated with autistic individuals. And so I'm just going to talk broadly about sex education among autistic adolescents and adults. And here's the thing. I think we all need accurate information. It's difficult to make informed choices without accurate information. It's difficult to know the risks. And many of our autistic individuals are going to engage in sexual behaviors. So I think my philosophy is, as long as parents and everyone is on board, that we need to provide that information so that we can encourage things like the right kinds of behaviors. But the other concern that I always have is if and I'll give a warning here. We're talking about some difficult topics here, but one of the things that we also know is that autistic individuals, and certainly individuals with other developmental disabilities, Down syndrome, intellectual disability, things like that, are at much higher risks of being victims of sexual assault. So one thing that I will always advocate for is that when we're talking to adolescents, and we're thinking about things like sex education, it's important because it's important for people to know what sorts of things are not okay, right? And what aren't protective spaces, and when isn't it okay for people to engage in particular kinds of acts with you. And so that's part of sex education, right? That's part of that picture. It's important that we do that. So that's my broad advice, is to just think about the different ways that it's important and communicate that to the autistic individuals themselves, but also to family and to everyone involved in this process. Another lovely question that has been asked was, can we share other ways of asking people how they have been doing, besides asking, how have you been doing? Right? Because we know that if I ask most of us, how have you been doing? The vast majority of you in this room are probably going to say, ooh, and there's another lovely message I'm definitely going to get to. All right. Sorry, just such great chats. I'm so thankful for all of you for participating in this chat and conversation. So yes, asking how have you been doing? Well, the first thing is there are lots of different ways of expressing how I'm doing. Certainly, we can ask those questions. Other things that I look for are I'll ask people I'll give them visuals. So visuals like smiley faces and things. How do you feel right now? Right, I'm happy. Putting that in the classroom so that someone who might not be able to express themselves verbally can communicate that to the teacher. I encourage teachers always to check in their emotions of students. So any teachers that I work with will talk about, how do you check in on your students? How do you ask them how they're doing? And so oftentimes it'll be about incorporating that into the school routine, right? Incorporating into the classroom some space for all the students to tell how they're doing. And it's all about how are you doing in this moment? Right? So it's not about how have you been doing over the past 2 weeks, because that's a difficult question to answer for most of us. But in fact, the teacher is doing some regular checking in, and then I get to check in on the teacher and see how things are going. So I'll use a lot of picture visuals. Sometimes a lot of autistic individuals that I talk to tell me that they don't say words like sad in the same way that you or I or non-autistics might say the word sad. So one of the things that I'll tend to ask is, I'll tend to have a conversation with folks. This is me in my therapist role here, but I'll tend to talk and say, sometimes people have bad days. That might be when someone just feels really low energy or is frowning or just feels really, really bad. Have you ever felt that way? Tell me about that. And then, and sometimes what I'll find is autistics will tell me they call that feeling like a train or dumpy or something else. They'll use different words. And so I want to understand what their language is. And then I can ask them, how much have you felt dumpy? How have you felt this kind of bad? That sort of thing is how I'll approach it. Really trying to get in this individualized way of how do you express yourself, and can I create spaces for you to feel comfortable, communicating in that way. So that's my answer. I think a lot of visuals and a lot of adaptive intervention, thinking about providing modes for individual expression. So there's a comment here in the chat that I absolutely want to address, and I'm going to try and do it sensitively as much as possible. So forgive me as I speak cautiously here. But there's someone who has been receiving cognitive behavioral therapy with a therapist weekly, and it's very stressful. This person has been seeing a therapist for several months, and it's just shut down. It's not working. And this person says it's the fourth. They've gone to several therapists, and it just doesn't work. And what do we do here? How do we handle this? And my answer is, first of all, keep trying. Keep trying to connect. That is absolutely what you want to do. If you mention here in the message, the person mentions that this person seems to communicate via text, text-based platform. So is there space where this, your child can talk with therapists over text to try and find the right fit? My personal philosophy of therapy, especially when I'm working with someone new to me, is that we don't start off with the really messy emotional stuff that's quite difficult for all of us. But let's start off with doing something that's meaningful. So oftentimes when I would approach my therapy with someone who doesn't necessarily want to communicate verbally in that way, let's participate and do something together. Let's just build a relationship together, because that's the only way that people are going to open up, is if there is some relationship, if there is some way that we can connect. And to that, I would encourage whoever you work with to just do things with your child that are their preferred activities. You haven't listed necessarily here in chat, and you certainly don't need to, but what are their preferred activities? But take some moments to really connect with them on doing what they want to do. One of my favorite activities, when I'm with my wonderful autistic friends and folks that I work with, is to, I'm sure the different things that we've done to build rapport. It's walking around their neighborhood. It is playing a video game together. It is even sometimes dancing together, jumping together, flapping together, those sorts of things that allow us some space to connect. Those are really meaningful moments, and that provides the space to open up. So I would suggest trying to find that right fit from a therapist. But I what I hope is that you're able to find a therapist where it isn't stressful, because the problem with stress in therapy means that it's more difficult to grow. When I'm stressed, it's more difficult for me to learn. It's more difficult for me to move forward. So providing a space that isn't built in stress is what I hope you can find. I am always so saddened to hear whenever these mismatches happen, or just when things have been difficult. A very pragmatic question in the chat that I can easily answer, which is this presentation is going to be recorded. It is recorded. It will be stored somewhere, I believe. I don't know where, but it will be stored somewhere. So more information forthcoming.
Yeah, we'll have that on the HCAS website. So, and we'll probably be sending out the link to, well, actually you registered through Pathfinders, but it will be on the HCAS website. And I will put that in the chat, our link. I just muted you, Aaron, sorry.
I can unmute myself. Delightful. And I'm gonna just see some more questions here. Lots of wonderful questions. And so a question here, and you know, a good, certainly a really good question is how does OT fit in with applied behavioral analysis, or ABA, as you might know it? You know, how does this fit in with ABA? You know, and then goes on to say, you know, why might you go to OT? Why might you go to a school-based OT versus a private OT? All the complexities about who in the world do you go to? So let me try and address some of that here. The primary difference between a school-based OT and a private OT is that school-based occupational therapists are tasked with, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier, they're tasked with working on school-based goals. Right? We have to work on something that relates to your academic performance, and I have to relate that to your academic performance. Now, the wonderful thing about academics is you do just about everything in school, right? I mean, you participate in gym, you eat, sometimes you get dressed when you're going to PE, right? There's so many great, fantastic things that happen in school that can help you in life. That's usually school. We think that school should be designed to prep you for life. So that the primary difference is that your therapist has to connect it to school if they're a school-based OT, versus if they're a private OT, they don't have to make that justification. They just have to make the justification that this area matters, that whatever they're working on matters for your child, for yourself, for your loved one. That's all they have to do, and justify it to whoever the payer is, whether it's insurance, whether it's a grant, Medicaid, you know, whoever that happens to be. Now, how is occupational therapy different from applied behavior analysis? Well, applied behavior analysis, or ABA, is a very specific type of intervention. ABA was sort of founded based on this idea of what we're going to call a behaviorism, where you sort of present, you sort of try and promote positive behaviors and reduce negative behaviors. That's kind of the broad ideas behind ABA. But ABA therapists, occupational therapists, are more focused. We come from a different frame of reference. Our focus really is on enabling you to participate in the meaningful things that are meaningful to you. So from that lens, my focus is really on what are your goals, what are the things that you want to do. And if you want to be able to, if you're want to be able to present as non-autistic because that's really important for your work setting or something, I can help you with that. We can work on that. But also, I believe it's completely fine and okay and awesome for you to present as exactly as you are. As I started this talk, as autistic and whatever. So I really want to make sure that my goals fit in with you. My goals fit in with your interests in that sort of whole person-centered approach. That's kind of the broad difference here. I would say that I would encourage you, if you're thinking about yourself or your loved one and you're thinking, I want to work on specific behaviors, that might be a space where you go to an ABA individual. But if you're thinking, I really want to focus on my participation in things, then you might want to go to, I want to be able to complete a particular activity or work on a particular thing that's meaningful to me or my family or my loved one. That might be the moment to go to an occupational therapist in that space. There's a lot of more refined differences from us as well. And I also, won't. I'll just make a brief acknowledgement that there are also different types of occupational therapists, just like there are different types of applied behavior analysts and behavioral technicians and things like that. And so just make sure you find the right fit for you is what I'm gonna say. Find the right person that matches with you and matches with your kiddo. All right, so taking a look at the time. So because we're right at the tail end of our time, and I'm sensitive of our time together here, I'm seeing a lot of wonderful, great questions. And what I'm going to do is encourage any of you that have any existing questions that I didn't quite get to, email me. Some of them are specific to you. It very much looks like some of them are a little more broad, but I'm happy to continue our conversation. My email is Dallman, ADALLMAN @towson.edu. I check it very, very regularly. And I'm also would be delighted and happy to talk with you, whether it's over email, it's over phone call, over Zoom call, or WebEx call like this. I'm very, very happy and would be delighted to speak with you. So please send me all and any of your questions or thoughts or reflections from today's talk. And I'd be delighted. And I want to end by saying thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for listening and talking, thinking and reflecting with me. I'm so delighted to be a part of a community of so many people that are like-minded and care about autistics, just like I do. I live in Howard County, so you might catch me walking around. I don't always have a bow tie on, but I frequently do. So if you ever encounter me, let's stop and chat. I'd love to meet you.
Thank you, Dr. Dallman. It was a lovely talk. It was great to hear your perspective on occupational therapy and how we can help support individuals with autism or autistics. And keep them healthy, keep them as productive and happy as possible in their lives. What I will say is that we will have the recording of this webinar on our website, the Howard County Autism website, and I put the link to that page in the chat as well as the link to the website. And if you send questions to Dr. Dallman, we'll collect those up with his responses, and we'll probably post a document as well with his responses so that those are available to everyone, because I presume that you are not the only one with the question that you might be asking. And we hope to have Dr. Dallman's answers benefit as many people as possible. But thank you so much for your time and joining us today. Dr. Dallman, thank you again. And I think that's about it. Have a lovely rest of your day and take care out there.
Nice meeting everyone.